The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome to Real Agriculture's Canola School series. I'm Kara Oosterhuis. We are now headed to talk to Anique Josuttes, who is a tech marketing specialist with BASF. How's it going today?
Pretty good. How about yourself, Kara?
Good. So, as I said, we're kind of at the time of the year we're starting to look at some early insects scouting. Do you want to kind of talk about some of your tips and tricks that you're informing producers about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think top of everyone's mind every year is flea beetles. That's the big one, right? And scouting for them is starting to take place depending on where you are in Western Canada and if those canola crops are starting to sprout up. And the other one being cutworms. In certain areas, cutworms are a really big concern as well. So in terms of tips and tricks, biggest one, you got to get out there and you got to scout because those damage thresholds can come up really quickly and action does need to take place when those get a little bit closer there.
And how many different spots in a field are you recommend looking at? I know sometimes, we have, especially the people who have lots of fields to look at, they're driving past and they're going, okay, I could maybe see what's going on in that field, but talk about, the importance of actually getting in there and looking at different locations.
Yeah, so if we think about flea beetles, they're going to invade from the outside of the field, like they overwinter in that litter on the outside of the field, and they'll come in. So you'll start to see their impact in the headlands first, and then as things progress and their populations get bigger and things keep moving on there with the season, they're going to move throughout the field. So I suggest not just looking at the headlands, but really getting in there and taking a look throughout the crop. When I think about cutworms, they're going to showcase their damage in the sandier areas of your field. So on the knolls, those drier sections, that's where you're going to see their damage first. But again, assessing a variety of different areas because they feed more so in patches throughout the field and then branch out from there.
And now when we're looking at both cutworms and flea beetles, can those populations grow really quickly? Is that something that you're going to want to be on top of?
Absolutely. So the action threshold for flea beetles is 25% damage. Canola plants can actually withstand 50% leaf loss before that economic impact is actually realized. But because that damage and that leaf loss can exponentially increase so quickly, the action threshold is actually at that 25% leaf loss, or if there's 3 bites in the stem, because stem feeding can really, really drastically reduce plant stand rate.
And what about on the side of cutworms?
Yeah, so cutworms as well, they can really get going there in terms of damage. For those thresholds there with the cutworms is 4 to 6 larvae per meter squared. You got to dig for those guys, right? They usually only feed at night as well, so it's a little bit harder to scout for them. Usually inspecting the rows for any missing or those freshly cut plants is the way to look at it before you start to see those really large bare patches where, things are getting kind of out of control there.
And talk about the importance of, having the proper tools on farm. Like you said, these are such timely decisions you're making. So you want to make sure you're able to, you see it. And if you have to go spray, you're going to get out and spray. Talk about that.
So we need to make sure that we do have those foliar insecticides at hand. You've maybe had the conversation with your retail, your rep, whatever it may be from that side of things. Pyrethroids do work as contact. So when we think about Desis and Pounce there from that Invigor commitment program that we want to support, you do need to understand how they work and make sure that you're utilizing them from the best practice management.
And for insecticides, when we're looking at mixing in water, things like that, is the more water, the better?
Absolutely. So with those contact, like I said, is the way that they work. So the more water, the better. Both of those labels do have a 10 gallon per acre minimum, but if you can bump that up and get some higher contact, especially as the crop is starting to leaf out more, you're going to get better efficacy there. Temperature is another big one. So you want to apply when the insect, depending on the insect, flea beetles or cutworms are actively feeding. So when I think about cutworms, that's in the evening or into the night when they're actually out there actively feeding. Flea beetles, they usually feed when it's warmer out, right? You're going to see them on top of the leaves, and when it rains, they go down and underneath the leaves. But you can apply those products at higher than 25 degrees Celsius, so keeping that top of mind as well. So kind of as close to nightfall as possible for those.
And I know when we think of spraying, lots of times people think of, is it too windy? Is it not? All important things, but I don't know how many people actually really pay attention to temperature.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For those products to work for the best that they can, as well as those insects to be out there actively feeding.
And for insecticides, when do you know if you've done a good job spraying? Is it very product dependent? Is it insect dependent? If you're going out there and you're spraying, should you see within the next day that these flea beetles have really died off?
So that really does depend on the population that you have in your field, the environment at the time. That's actually a really, really hard one. But in a lot of cases, you can see yourself having to apply those products 2, maybe 3 times in the year. Definitely refer to the labels when it comes to spray intervals and the number of specific passes for that specific insecticide. But often you do have to get in there, especially if populations are really great.
And like you said, we're all kind of focusing on flea beetles. There are, of course, lots of other insects. But do you want to kind of talk about the importance of staging, too, when it comes to those flea beetles? Because, you might see a flea beetle later in season and
not really care.
Yeah, like the revenge spraying really isn't going to do much.
Yeah, totally. So usually once that canola seedling is past that 3 to 4 leaf stage, the impact that flea beetles have on them, it's not going to really impact the canola crop economically. So ensuring that before that 3 to 4 leaf stage, so as it's coming out of the ground there, that new growth, those cotyledons, that's when we're really concerned about flea beetles, scouting for them, and then applying that foliar insecticide if need be.
So when we're looking at actual techniques for scouting for flea beetles or cutworms or any of those early insects, what are some of the things you're going to want to be doing? Obviously, you won't be sweeping at the early stages, so what else would you be doing?
So you're going to look for kind of that shot hole appearance when we think about flea beetles on those leaves. So getting down on your hands and knees and understanding what the feeding is like and whether or not it's on the leaves or the stem, because that's going to differ your action threshold, right, from that side of things. You also want to look at the new growth, because they're going to feed on the new growth as it comes up. So that can help you understand if those thresholds or populations are growing or decreasing, as well to your earlier question, if you need another insecticide foliar application. For cutworms, when we're thinking about scouting for them, because they feed above ground at night, there is that risk of those plant carcasses drying up and then blowing away, and you don't really get a good understanding on the amount of dead plants that they've cut off. So look for freshly cut plants early in the morning or the evening, because that early detection is so key. And then digging during the day to try and find some of those cutworms. They're tough to discover, but once you do get a pretty good understanding of the amount present.
Anything else you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. Just make sure you guys are getting out there, checking those crops, because things can move pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much for your time.